So I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar is an HAEA Youth Edition webinar, and tonight's topic is finding your voice and advocating for yourself at school or in your community. My name is Lisa Facciola, and I will be the HAEA moderator for tonight's webinar. So I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, and thank you for joining us. Tonight's webinar has been developed specifically for kids and teens with the goal of empowering young people to feel comfortable talking about HAE. We will also provide some tips to help kids know when to use their voice to speak up when they need help. And while some schools may be returning to a virtual environment this year, it's still ever important for young people to be able to communicate their needs and have open communication with their teachers and other people in their life. Next slide, please. So you might be asking yourself, what does it mean to find my voice and why is it important? So finding your voice is an important part of growing up, and learning to use your voice doesn't always come naturally, but over time and with practice, you will begin to feel comfortable talking about your HAE with others and letting people know when you need support. Next slide, please. And before we get started, I wanted to share a quote from Carly, who is a member of the Youth Leadership Council. She says that finding my voice means to be unashamed about my HAE in hopes to inspire people to learn about my rare condition. Next slide. And before we move forward, I'd like you to remember one important thing. Using your voice to communicate your needs helps others understand what you're going through and what they can do to help you. Next slide, please. So now, like I mentioned before, learning to use your voice doesn't always come naturally, but with a little practice, a little persistence, and some patience, you'll begin to feel more comfortable talking about HAE and letting others know how they can help you. And remember, you have to practice speaking up because you might not feel comfortable the first few times, but I promise it will get easier the more you practice. I'd like to remind you to be persistent. Practice with a family member or a friend. And like I said before, it might not come naturally, but be persistent. But also be patient. HAE is a complicated topic, and people might not understand at first, but don't give up because it gets easier and people will learn. So next slide, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about the benefits of learning to use your voice. So as you begin to use your voice, people around you will be able to understand HAE and how it affects you. Those same people will begin to learn how that they can support you and help you when needed. And you will begin to build confidence. And you need to feel confident knowing that people understand your situation and are able to help you if needed. And also just remember that practice makes perfect. You might not get it at first, but don't give up. It's really important that you keep trying because ultimately this is a life skill that you'll carry with you forever. Learning to talk about your HAE is something vitally important. So now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. Next slide, please. Gabriella is a member of the HAEA youth community and has really mastered the art of using her voice to advocate for herself. She knows firsthand that learning to speak up isn't easy, but she will be sharing some tips with you to help you feel more comfortable speaking up about your HAE. So, hey, Gabriella, thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabby. I'm a patient with HAE, and I just want to give you a little introduction about myself before we begin. I'm from Florida, and I'm currently studying criminal justice at St. John's University in New York, and I really love advocating for the HAE community. So this was a wonderful opportunity to speak on about using your voice and empowering yourself, especially with HAE and in circumstances with school. Okay, next slide, please. So I want to start off with my story. I was diagnosed with HAE when I was about 9 years old. Before then, I had a lot of misdiagnoses. I had extreme intestinal tract swells, so my doctors thought I had ulcers, so I was put on an ulcer medication. All my swells they thought had to do with allergies, which was not the case. So I finally got properly diagnosed at Miami's Children's Hospital. And from then on, my nurses and teachers took really great care of me. When I got into middle school, I had a really difficult experience with my administration. I unfortunately was assaulted by an older male student. And when I went forward about the situation, my administration had told me that no one was there to babysit my needs, even though they knew my condition. They knew how rare and how extreme it could be. And they basically told me that I couldn't be a part of their school because there was no one there to take care of me. And even though my needs were not met by the professionals who were supposed to take care of me, I found this as an opportunity to empower myself and find my voice. Next slide, please. So I want to ask the question, what challenges do you experience? And I know how difficult it can be with school. You can have so many insecurities and misunderstandings and full time completing assignments and keeping up, especially with absences. So when it comes to insecurities, it's hard to tell someone about your rare disorder. You might be scared that they'll make fun of it or they just won't understand. And that happens a lot because we'll go to school and we'll look pretty normal. And people say, there's nothing wrong with you. You look normal to me. And that's the misunderstanding part where teachers may neglect your needs when you tell them that you have a swell coming on or that you feel uncomfortable with something that a student had said about your HAE. And I know how difficult it is to keep up on assignments, especially if you're having attacks constantly. And if you miss enough school, you could fall behind very easily. I know a lot of us have these difficulties with our education. These were the main difficulties that I had. And I know that some of you may have different challenges that you may face, but it's really important that you use your voice to speak up on these difficulties. Next page, please. So I really want to emphasize understanding your limits. If you feel an attack, it's really important that you speak up. If someone says something that makes you feel uncomfortable, speak up. And if you feel overwhelmed about schoolwork, it's important to speak up. And you have to know your limits with HAE because you have to be that voice at the table, especially if you're still in school or if you're in college. It's important that you let your teachers, your friends, your parents know how you're feeling and the emotions that can come along with this. And I want to pose another question as, who would you speak to in these situations? Okay, next. The number one important step in this is to be prepared. Plan ahead and work with your school in the beginning of the year to create a plan. And this could be talking to your administration, your teachers, your nurses, setting up in-service trainings, and creating a 504 plan even. Okay, next. There are a lot of circumstances and situations where you can use your voice. And it's really important that your voice is being heard, especially when it comes to in and out of school. And some of these are not limited, these situations. You could use your voice wherever you need and wherever you feel comfortable with. So one of the situations is extracurricular activities. You should be telling your coaches or your instructors about your HAE and how it could affect your performance, because they need to know when you're having a swell, and if you do have one, what to do in the case of an emergency. And it's really important to talk to your friends' parents, especially at a friend's house or even between your friends, to tell them how about your HAE and what to do if you have an attack. And a couple other places that it's really, really vital for you to voice your concerns is at a summer camp. You could talk to your counselors and make sure to inform them about your limits, because if you don't set boundaries, you're not sure as to how far you can get with your HAE. And it's really important that you know that your limits and circumstances can vary. You should let your bus driver know if you're having a swell, because those are probably one of the toughest times to be safe. I know I was on a bus countless of times and I had swells, and the bus driver had to pull over and make sure that I was okay and contact my parents and my school just to make sure that I'm safe. Another important place is on field trips, and you should talk to the adults in charge of the field trip and make sure that that your needs are being met. So how can you use your voice? And remember, your voice is just as important as anyone else's. You have to make sure that you speak up and listen to those around you that are willing to give advice. Next. So ways to use your voice is having an open conversation. Have an open conversation with your teachers, parents, and friends about your feelings and your HAE. And it's important to let your voice be heard everywhere. When I first started school, I would always have to go with my parents to, sorry, there's background noise. Sorry about that, I have background noise going on. Before school started, I would have to go with my parents to talk to my administrators and teachers and nurses and tell them how I feel. My parents really tried to instill that using your voice factor into my education, because they know how important it is for me to tell the people around me how I'm feeling, and in case of an attack that they're not there. Another important way to use your voice is during in-service trainings. You can go with your parents to talk to your nurses, teachers, administration in cases of what to do if you have an episode with HAE. Another really important way to use your voice is through code words. You might feel a little uncomfortable telling your teacher or your friends that you're having a swell. So you could just tell them that you're feeling a tingle or you simply don't feel well. I know with my teachers, I would tell them that I didn't feel well, and they would never ask why. They would just let me go to the nurse's office because they understood how severe HAE was and how how comfortable I was in the settings around them. And another really great way to use your voice is having a buddy system. Find a close friend that you trust and tell them about your HAE. Your buddy can be supportive and help you through HAE attacks. One of the most important, I believe, is to get a 504 plan. You could talk to your parents about getting one, and it's to make sure that your education is never affected by your HAE, and it could really help you through college. I know it helped me a lot through college. I went to the Office of Disabilities, and they were really helpful. Once I showed them my 504 plan, and I probably wouldn't have passed this semester without their help. So getting a 504 plan is really important. Next slide. So these are just a couple helpful tips. You can go to the next one. I know it can be scary for the first time you open up about HAE, but that's just your first step to advocating for yourself. And you have to love who you are with HAE. Don't let mean comments like people asking if it's contagious or insecurities and difficulties push you back. You're unique. Another tip is to be assertive with your voice. You'll feel more powerful and confident at speaking when you put emphasis on your needs. Another great tip is to identify what supports you the most and what can benefit you in the long run. So what can you do to help yourself? These three are probably the biggest that you can factors that go into preventing HAE attacks and understanding your settings and being comfortable with who you are. So take your medicine on time to prevent attacks, or immediately when you feel an attack coming on. Practice using your voice to express your thoughts and feelings, and understand your limits and feel comfortable with yourself. Next, sorry. So that was my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, you could reach Lisa at HAE.org. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gabriella. And I just want to emphasize a couple other things. I know that I hear from parents pretty frequently that learning to use your voice is something that their kids are practicing. So I just want to give a big tip out there to all of the kids who are watching this, that first of all, that you're not alone. That if you're looking for other kids like you who are going through very similar things that you can share your experiences with, feel free to email me, and I'd love to connect you with our amazing HAE youth community. But also, really, I think Gabriella brought up some really important points, and one of those is really learning to feel comfortable advocating for yourself. You are the one who knows your body the best. You're the one who knows when an attack is coming on. And I think it's really easy for, especially if you're caught up in school and you're having a good time and you start to maybe feel a little swell come on, or maybe your hand starts to swell that you want to keep going with your day and not mention it to anybody. But it's really important to share those attacks when they're coming on so that you can get some medication in you as quickly as possible. And remember that the sooner that we take our medication, the sooner we're going to feel better. So it's really important to make sure that you communicate your needs, especially when you're feeling an attack come on. But even when you're not feeling an attack coming on, you want to talk about your HAE before it becomes a problem, before you have an attack. So if you go to someone when you're having an attack and wait until that moment to share with them that you have HAE, they're not going to understand. There's going to be a lot going on. They're going to want to help you. And so it's really important to talk to your parents, have your parents help you set up a meeting with your teacher or anyone, basically your support team at school, and identify who those people are. Those are going to be people like your school nurse, like your guidance counselor, like your teacher, and other people who are part of your support system at school, so that you can tell them about your HAE, let them know what's going on. And that way, when you feel something coming on, you'll know that they already know about your HAE, and it'll make that conversation so much easier. And I love how Gabriella talked about the code words, because code words are an excellent way to talk to someone about HAE without kind of letting everybody else in the room know what's going on. So you may feel an HAE attack coming on, and maybe you don't want to publicly, share this with your whole class, and you can kind of talk to your teacher and share that code word, and she'll know what you're talking about. So I just want to thank Gabriella for sharing your story and providing all these really helpful tips. I know that you have really become quite an advocate and quite good at speaking up for yourself and sharing what your needs are. And if you're wondering what that 504 plan is, we will go ahead and provide a link to an informational brochure in the YouTube video and when we send this out. But the HAEA also has a series of really valuable school resources that we've put together, and we'll be sending out in an email this week. So you guys can expect to get a back to school newsletter from us with some tips and tricks and some links to our printable resources that have been designed specifically to help you with all of your back to school and HAE preparedness. So I'd love to invite anybody, all of our guests this evening, to submit any questions that you have for either Gabriella or I, and we would be happy to answer them. But I have a couple questions to get started with, and I'll go ahead and share them, and we can kind of go from there. So the first question is asking about any sort of training that the HAEA has to help kids advocate and be effective in their asks. So I'll go ahead and answer that. And I think, Gabriella, you actually participated in this, but the HAEA, we put together a really fabulous Advocacy training program. And it's a series of 6 activities that kids can work through either independently or with their parents. A lot of it is really kind of focused on identifying your personal HAE story, learning also about why legislative advocacy is important. So part of this training is kind of focused on legislative advocacy, but it's really kid friendly. So kids of all ages, middle school, high school, elementary school, can kind of work through these different activities really easily. And so if you're interested in participating in that advocacy training program, you can email me using that email at the bottom of the screen, lisa@haea.org, and I would be happy to give you all the information you need about that training program. And Gabriella, I think you participated in that, right?
Yes, I did. It was a really, really great experience. Honestly, it helped me so much getting in tune with my representatives and congressmen, actually, and getting helpful tips from the HAE organization on how to advocate for myself. And I still have some of the information. I have like a little book that's an advocacy workbook, and I use it all the time when creating presentations and advocating for myself.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's a really excellent program. And I'm always happy to just chat with you on the phone too. If you're looking to, looking for tips and tricks on what would be helpful in terms of learning to kind of use your voice and speak up for yourself. So the next question that I have here is, we know that COVID-19 is definitely playing a role in the school year. And this question is, how can I advocate for myself at school or in college during the COVID-19 pandemic? What's going on? So I know I touched on that just a little bit in the beginning of the presentation. And although a lot of kids are going back to virtual learning this year, it's still important to talk to your teachers and talk to your support staff. I know that we had a really awesome parent edition webinar, and and our guest speaker in our last webinar, Lisa, was talking about the fact that her daughter had to participate in webcam videos. But one day she was having a swell and needed to communicate that while she wasn't able to be on camera that day, she was still going to call in and participate in the meeting. And so making sure that you stay in communication with your teacher about these little things and maybe little accommodations or situations that come up, I think is really important. A virtual environment requires extra communication because you're not seeing them in person. So it's just really important to maintain an open line of communication with your teachers during this time. Did you want to add anything to that, Gabriella?
I did. It's just really important to stay in contact with your teachers. I know for this semester I'm going to be completely online, and I know if I have any HAE attacks or swells, that I would have to reach out to them and let them know that maybe I need a little bit more time on this assignment, or I need a further deadline for the project that's coming up. It's just really important to talk to your teachers and make sure that they're on the same page as you.
Definitely. Let's see, I have another question here. So one of these questions, and I'm going to defer this to you. How do I advocate with my family to help me take more ownership over my condition as I go to college? So we know that as you transition into college, it is this more independent arena that you're in.
Yes. So when I moved to New York to go to college, I was all on my own. So I had to set up my own appointments with the Office of Disability. I had to print out all my forms and everything needed for my counselor. And really, she helped me through the process and getting the best recommendations for school, for creating letters basically to my professors to let them know that that I may need more time, or I might need deadlines pushed back. And it's really important that you talk to your family, and you need to let them know what you can and can't do. Be comfortable with them and be comfortable with yourself, and be comfortable with the trusted professionals, especially in school. And it's important to let your voice be heard, especially when talking to, obviously, the Office of Disabilities. It's important that you let them know what you can and can't do. And then they're going to ask you all these types of questions, and whether or not you feel comfortable with them is up to you.
Definitely. And another thing that I kind of want to point out, that as teenagers begin to transition into college, you don't always have your parents around to remind you to take your medication or help you with that process. So becoming more independent and reminding yourself and knowing when you're supposed to take your medication, take it on time, take it early, take it as prescribed, is a really important part of becoming more independent, and alleviating some of these unexpected attacks that may pop up. So that's another really great tip that I have as well. And it's not just for college students, it's for everyone who's, hopefully taking medication to treat their attacks. And so another question I have is there, so a big part of the HAEA programs is legislative advocacy. And while legislative advocacy is a little bit different from advocating for your school for yourself at school, legislative advocacy is a big part of what we do, and we love to invite young people to be part of this. And so this question is, it's very similar. How can I learn to talk to congressmen about how important HAE research is as if I go to Capitol Hill? So once again, we offer this fabulous legislative training program, and I would love for anyone who's interested to participate. It's an awesome, awesome interactive multimedia format that invites you to participate and submit your story as part of the process. So again, if you're interested in that, click down there and shoot me an email, and I would love to give you more information. So I see we had a question come up. So the question is from Leah. So what should I do if I'm unable to leave a classroom when in a college environment when I have an HAE attack? So I think that's a really good question, and I'll start, and then Gabriella, do you want to finish?
Sure, that's no problem.
So I definitely recommend communicating with your professor in advance to let them know that you have HAE, and if you experience an attack in the middle of class, that you need to be excused. Waiting out an HAE attack is not a good idea, because we know that they get worse as they progress over time. So I would definitely recommend that instead of waiting until you get an attack to address the situation, address it at the beginning of the year. Let your professor know if you need to work with the accommodations or the Student Disabled Services Office to make sure that your professors are equipped with the knowledge. They may need information aside from just a meeting with you. They may want documentation or some sort of supportive document from the Student Accommodations Office, and just get ahead of it so that if you do walk out, and let them know, be transparent. I want to be here for class. I want to be part of this learning environment, and I am going to work just as hard, if not harder, than everyone else in this class. But there may be a moment when I need to be excused. And it's not because I'm walking out for personal reasons, it's because I may be in distress. So that would be my main suggestion for addressing that situation. Did you want to add to that, Gabriella?
Sure. I just have to agree that being prepared before class begins, before the semester starts, just make sure to reach out to your teachers or your professors and let them know in case an emergency arises that you should be able to leave the classroom. I know with the Office of Disability, I said it a little bit earlier, that my counselor had to write a letter, and I had to give it to all my professors. And this basically tells them that if I need to leave class, that I can leave class. And if I need more time, then I need more time. And they can't really question that.
Exactly. And that's why it does help to know who your allies are at school. And by ally, I mean what school representatives are able to support you to validate your condition, to make sure that you stand out as not a student who's making kind of excuses or trying to leave early, that what you have is a legitimate situation that needs to be tended to immediately. I hope that answered your question, Leah. And so I would love to just thank everyone who joined us for tonight's webinar. And I would love to thank Gabriella for sharing your story and providing some of your tips. If you have any questions about tonight's webinar or would like more information, feel free to email me at lisa@haea.org. I would like to note that we will be posting a recording of tonight's webinar on our YouTube channel, which can be found by searching for US HAEA on YouTube. And I would like to just thank everyone for joining us tonight. This has been an HAEA Youth Edition webinar. The topic tonight was finding your voice and advocating for yourself at school. I'd like to once again thank our guest speaker, Gabriella Perez, for joining us tonight. Thank you so much, everyone.